Hello everybody to the Wisdom Factory in 2019. We are starting again, we are trying again to start with our conversation with Lynn Fuentes on chronic illness as a path to spiritual growth and personal development. So today we hope we can make it a little better. There were a lot of technical glitches. The original recording is still on the website, thewisdomfactory.net/Lynn-Fuentes. So you can see the first attempt there. We won't probably talk the same things, so maybe it's interesting for you to watch the first attempt too. So I'm here today, first of all, with my new co-host, Martin Ocek. Do you want to say hello for a moment?
Everyone.
Okay, you seem to be frozen, but you will wake up, hopefully.
Yeah, it's very cold here. That's wonderful.
Yeah, here too. You are in Istanbul, in Turkey. I'm in Italy, and we have a strangely cool, cold winter this year. So freezing overnight. So not much, but cold. Fire in the furnace. So now to you, Lynn Fuentes. Thank you to be with us again and to have be indulgent to our technical challenges, and that we can do the session again. So I think for people who haven't watched the first part, would be good if you introduce yourself again a little bit, where you come from and what you are up to do and what we are in this hour, what we will be talking about.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. I'm happy to be here, and I think we've all been through endless technical difficulties, so no problem at all. A little about myself. I have a background in teaching, and I was a lawyer for a while and a journalist. I've had a number of different careers. But during all that time, I've been involved with chronic illness in one way or another. My son has been severely ill for 32 years now. So I've been a caregiver during that time. I've also had a lot of other family members who've had all kinds of illnesses, ranging from cancer to addictions to you name it. When I was teaching at DePaul University in Chicago, and I decided to start a program for students with chronic illness because their needs were very different from what the usual disability office was able to offer. Disability offices tend to help a student at the beginning of the term with access or with a reader or something like that. But people with chronic illness, everything waxes and wanes, very unpredictable, and it was very difficult for students to go to school and be understood and be helped in the way they needed to be. So I started that program in 2003 and managed it into 2010. And as a result of that, I got to know a lot of other people with illness, a lot of students. And so I learned a lot from them. And I've been on the boards, a couple of illness organizations, including what used to be the CFIDS Association, is now Solve MECFS initiative. I was on that board for 11 years. So I've had a lot of background there. I also taught courses in illness. And I discovered integral philosophy, which some of the listeners may know, in 1993. And that turned my life around, both in terms of how I looked at illness, how I managed it, and how I brought it into everything I did, into the programs I was teaching and into the program for the students. So that's a little of my background, I guess. And right now I have a company with my husband called Transformation Teaching, and we offer online courses in both English and Spanish. Spanish is his native language. And so we're doing a lot, and we're putting on, with some other people, the first integral Hispano-American conference in June in Bogota. So that may interest people who can speak Spanish. We'd love to have you come.
Oh, wow, that would be great to go there.
I don't speak Spanish, but
I speak Italian, so I might get at least half of it.
And I have very ragged Spanish. I'm working on it. So anyway.
Okay, so let's go into the chronic illness topic. What do you understand about chronic illness? Last time we figured out is diabetes, or what sort of chronic illnesses you are talking about, which can...
Well, I talk about a really broad range, and I include addiction and I include mental illness in my definition of chronic illness. It's really an illness that interferes substantially with your life. I'm not talking about hay fever, which I have. We're talking about something that makes life different, where people have to really adjust themselves, and it comes into their life and turns up everything upside down. So it depends on the severity. Many of these illnesses have varying degrees of difficulty. Some people with diabetes function almost like everybody else, and other people have significant issues. And the same is true of, many of the autoimmune illnesses. They have a wide spectrum. So I tend to find the people that I work with mostly and that come to me are people with pretty severe illnesses. They've been often sick for a long time. They tend to be, I learn a lot from people in this situation. They tend to be very wise, very experienced. They have worked through so much, so many difficulties, and they have a lot to offer, which is one of the things I really want to bring out is how much people with illness have to offer, and how our society often doesn't see that.
This is interesting. Can you talk a little more about that? What do they have to offer?
Well, I think when we talk about human growth and development, usually it comes out of what can be called disorienting dilemmas. People get to a certain place in their life, and whatever's going on is somehow not satisfying. They can't figure out their problems. They're stuck in some way. And in order to move on, they find new ways to look at something. That's really what changes. The situation may not change, but the person changes. They have a new way of understanding what's going on. And a result of that, a lot of different options will open up. A lot of clarity might appear. So people who live a normal life can distract themselves from these dilemmas. So you don't have such a good job while you increase your social life, or various things are happening. You get a divorce, but you pour yourself into your work, or whatever it is. But if you're ill, you can't get away from the illness. There's no way to say, I'm not going to look at you today, I'm going to go out and play tennis, because you just can't do that. So I find that people with illness actually have to face these dilemmas head on, and over again. They're relentless. They're never ending. And so there's a continuous process of growth that goes on when you actually take on some of these questions, which can go deeper and deeper. You can start out with a very simple, practical problem. How do I manage this illness? And go very deeply into, what does this illness mean for me? How do I make a meaningful life with this illness? Into even deeply spiritual questions like, why is there suffering? And what does a world with suffering look like? And how does that work with my spirituality? So each people who are ill often have to deal with these questions, and I find that the answers are really pretty amazing. And another thing about this is that I think I mentioned last time that 50% of people in the United States have a serious chronic illness. And they're not all end of life. Obviously, a lot of them are, but there are many, many people between the ages of 18 and 45 who are seriously ill, and they're trying to manage a life. They're trying to have a job. They're trying to have a family. They're trying to have a social life, and they have a serious illness interfering with it. And what we do is we ignore it. As a society, we tend to think, oh, well, they'll just get better soon. Or if they don't, they get relegated to some backwater. Not only in the minds of society, but in their own lives. I think people who get ill are subject to all of these cultural beliefs, and they see themselves as somehow sidelined. They're not on the track to success or whatever. And one of the things I really believe is there is no one track for life. There are many paths for life, and there's nothing that says you have to be in what we have now, a pretty traditional model of go to school, get a good job, make a lot of money, so you can retire, and then you're successful. And I don't think that's the only way to be successful. And I think that people who are ill are on another life path, and it's an equally valid life path, and it has its own serious challenges and its own successes. So that's something that I feel very strongly as a result of the experiences that I've had and the work I've done with people.
The definition of what is success, is also not clear, because we in our society, that seems, when we talk in, let's say, integral terms and levels of development, very orange. Success means you make a lot of money, and I mean, it's success that we are still alive in many ways, isn't it?
I think so. I think, well, you can say, what is the purpose for life? Now, there's another really, really deep question. Is it to go out and be successful and productive and make a lot of money? I think life is just a whole lot bigger than that. And just living. Why are we here? I don't know. Maybe one of the reasons we're here is just to experience. Maybe our little set of receptors, my eyes, my ears, my understanding, is feeding the whole. And so maybe I really don't have to do anything so much as I have to receive. And in illness, you can receive. There's nothing that says that you're any less able. In fact, sometimes your senses are more acute because you have to be paying attention to so many things. So yeah, the definition of success, yes, in integral terms, the orange, driving, achieving is another one. That if we all seem to buy into it, I mean, at least a lot of people buy into, and those are the messages that you get. So you could feel like you're a failure if you're ill or you're, for some other reason, not on that track. I remember when I had small children, and a woman I knew also had small children, and we'd go to a party, and it would be like nobody wanted to talk to you because you weren't doing anything meaningful. So she used to make up a story that she did blue movies. So she would get some attention. And I think, that's changed a little bit over time, but not a lot. There are certain people who seem to have prestige and others who do not. And money and status seem to be still on top for that. And I'd like to see that change.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say are other success goals, or when you said, people with chronic illness, they are successful in different ways?
Yes, well, I think, first of all, do we set goals? You use that word, and that's a really interesting question, because if so, I think very different ones. Maybe it's more about who we are than what we do, and I think that's being neglected. So that I think, I can decide to be, and for me, I'm more interested in who the person is than in what they have done in most cases. I mean, actually, if you look at a life, most of what we do just turns to dust after we're gone. But if we have been kind to other people, or we have had some capacity for wisdom and helped others, I think that trickles more out into the world and has more effect in a way.
Mm-hmm. So it just happened more or less by coincidence that I saw a movie last night. It's called Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot. I don't know if you've seen that movie. It came out last year. And have you seen the movie?
No, I haven't.
It just made me think, it's the story of someone who was in an alcoholic and drunk in a car accident and got paralyzed from chest down. And he saw all this suffering, and then he became a somewhat famous cartoonist and became sober, and then went to the whole 12-step program. So it was kind of, obviously he was chronically handicapped, I would say, maybe not ill, but handicapped. Yeah. But it also, people make movies about people like that, like they make movies about Steve Jobs or other successful people who kind of pulled through something. And of course, there are very, very few movies made about the people who never became a famous cartoonist in a wheelchair or otherwise succeed. So how do people with chronic illnesses feel about that when they're fed sort of like the stories of the 1% who despite their chronic illness became somewhat famous and rich and made an orange success story out of it?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. I think it's wonderful that we are highlighting these stories, and not all stories of people who achieve in the ordinary way, but people who have overcome great handicaps. But there's also, I think, a problem in that I call it the heroically disabled. When we are faced with that, all the people, the other 99%, who actually can't do what this person can do, start to think, well, why shouldn't I? Or their friends and relatives, well, so and so wrote a book, and this man in a wheelchair managed to get to the top of Pikes Peak, and so what's the matter with you? And so I think it can be turned into kind of a punishing thing, even though the intention, I think, was great to highlight people and to show what they can do. Not everybody can. And I think we need to highlight those ordinary lives where for a person just getting a shower can be like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. It can take an incredible amount of effort. And they have no less productivity in a way. It's just that the energy level or the capacity is just so greatly reduced. But the person themselves is equally heroic.
Yeah.
So,
And if I may butt in with another question,
yeah.
you haven't mentioned cancer, I think, and I have a friend who's has an incurable cancer, as it seems. Is that seen as a chronic illness? Because of course some people go into remission and get healed, and other people are hanging in there, and other people are clearly, incurable. How can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I think cancer has in a way become a chronic illness because of all the treatments that people are, don't die, but often they have conditions. Sometimes the treatments themselves can leave them with difficulty. I know a lot of people with um, chronic fatigue syndrome can acquire it as a result of sometimes treatment from another illness, and it's something off in the body. So, yeah, cancer, I mean, an illness that's like a broken bone, or I had a cancer when I was in my 20s, but it was cured very rapidly and never caused me any new problems. And so I didn't regard that as a chronic illness that I have. But a lot of people with cancer are continuing to feel the effects in one way or another. And even if they're in remission, they're living with the question, will it come back? They're probably doing their best to lower their stress levels and eat well and do all those kinds of things that a person whose illness is active would do in order to prevent it. So their lives have changed too. I mean, these lines are very fuzzy, where we actually draw them. And I think a lot of it is self-definition. And I know there's a wonderful book out called In the Kingdom of the Sick by Laurie Edwards, which is a sociological discussion of illness in America. And she tries to draw some of these lines between disabled and chronically ill and disease. And all of these different words have different meaning. And one of the really odd things that came out was that people who have a chronic illness do not regard themselves usually as disabled. So I discovered this when I was teaching in part, and I've seen it play out in other ways, in that the student didn't come to the disability office, even though were in a way disabled from living a normal life, because disability to their mind meant maybe wheelchair or hearing difficulty or sight difficulty. So all of these different definitions make a difference. They make a difference to how people see themselves and how others see them and what kind of services they get, where they go. So it's a really interesting sociological question. So for myself, I don't draw very firm lines. I think if people self-select into my courses or into the program that I had or whatever, then that's fine. Their own definition is what counts.
But have you noticed that people have changed the definition of what their ailment is through thinking more about these different terms? I find it very fascinating because I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, I think
disabled and disease and what you just mentioned, these different
yeah, I have a friend. Her name is Pat Fennell, and she is a researcher into chronic illness, and also she's written a book called The Chronic Illness Workbook. But she has a 4-stage model of what people go through when they get sick, and the first is the crisis stage. illness is actually a trauma all by itself. When you get an illness, that itself is a trauma, and there you are in crisis trying to deal with it. And then the next phase is, and I hope I get these right, stabilization. As we don't, weather can cause things. So it can be a very, very destabilizing kind of experience. And often people go into what's called a push and crash model, where they start to feel a little better and they run out. My son did this. He would feel a little better. He'd sign up for guitar, the track team, and, you know, take on extra courses. And then 3 weeks later, be back in bed. So this is something that people, you know, it goes along with, in a way, denying the illness. I'm not really ill. I don't want to be ill. I refuse to be ill. So trying to live a normal life. And then going back into a phase of acceptance. Okay, this is my life. I now have a new life, and I have to figure out how to make that life work. So at that stage, people are seeing themselves differently and their illness differently. And then her fourth stage is transcendence, when you can move beyond, in a spiritual sense, move beyond the illness. So
I want to come in here because we did the series Conscious Living, Conscious Dying, and I interviewed German person, Harald Kastner, who had serious illness, an autoimmune disease. I mean, he still has it, but it was in '96 he was diagnosed for other 3 years of life, you know, and I mean, he's still alive. And when we talked, people can find that on the website under the bonus calls in the Conscious Living, Conscious Dying series. He said he refuses to call himself ill. He says he is a healthy person with some restrictions. And he explains how, the same what you said, the first year he was very much in sports and he couldn't do that all anymore. And then he used himself as a research object, how he could go on. And he didn't do only normal medicine, but tried out alternative medicine altogether. And he figured out how to survive more than 20 years. And sometimes he has some burst times and sometimes completely seems normal. So it is amazing how people can navigate these situations. And I'm really in big admiration of, because I have now a little bit of, you know, a cold and already get impatient.
Yeah, it's amazing how a little thing can just throw us off, and then we look at people with these massively difficult problems. And I think that's a really interesting point to bring up about integral again, is that using integral philosophy, which I try to make very accessible, can help us to work in many areas of our life, and we can improve things slowly and in each area of life, and so that gradually we can bring them together. We integrate our care for ourselves, and we deal with our emotions, we deal with our physical self, we deal with a lot of different things in our environment, and that's one of the things I try to do in the courses, is we use these models to try to look into as many corners as possible as to how we can look at illness and how we can improve things. So
yeah, would you like to explain a little bit how you see illness from the integral perspective? And
yeah, actually I'd love to do that. I love integral, so I like to get a chance. So we use several models. One model that is very, very helpful in illness is called the 4-quadrant model. And this model shows how there are basically 4 ways we can look at life, and we can look at illness. So taking illness as an example, we can see that our physical body has got something going on with it. It's not working the way we want it to. So objectively, there's something here to see. And we go to the doctor and we get tests, and we can take our temperature and our blood pressure and do blood tests and get data back. And this is all an objective look at what's going on. But at the same time that that's going on, the person is feeling things. They're feeling fear. They're feeling upset. They're feeling frustrated. They have a lot of things going on with them. They're worrying about Can I keep my job? What's going to happen to my marriage? Am I the person I used to be? These are all these interior things going on with a person. So we have the interior of ourselves and we have the exterior of ourselves. So those left and the upper right quadrants of this model. And then we have this going on as a society. So we have the collective side, that's the individual side, my interior and my objective. Exterior of the world, which is the systems we're in. We have to now deal with a medical system. We have to deal with an insurance system. Our employment, the system we work there, that's going to be affected. Even transport to the treatment that we need and things like that. And then there's the interior of the collective, which is the norms of societies. Wherever we are, we live in a culture and it has certain views about illness. Those are going to affect us. We're going to see television ads about illness that paint everybody as the Pepsi generation, and if you just take this medication, you'll be out throwing a frisbee to your dog. And yet the person is nowhere near that, and they're very ill. So they get these messages and they have relationships, this inner relationship with their family, their friends, their employers. So all those are the interior sides of our social lives. And so when we look at illness, if we look at only one part of it, we go to the doctor and all they're interested in is the tests. And they say, well, tests don't show anything here. But the person knows they're sick. They know there's something wrong with them. Now we've got a disjunct between these quadrants. Or maybe you want to take a certain treatment, but your insurance won't pay for it. So now you're dealing with the insurance system. And even though maybe there's something that would help, you can't use it. So you've got to deal with that area. And then you go home to your family and you come up with, maybe you want to try alternative medicine, and they're all horrified. So now you've got a battle going on in the interior cultural world. So each one of these quadrants is really important. So we try to take illness and look at what's going on inside me, what's going on objectively in my world, what's going on in my relationships, and what's going on in my relationship with the various systems that I live in. And if you can improve any one of these, it's synergistic. It can help improve the others. I mean, if your family situation is better, you can relax a little more. Maybe you can have a better conversation with your doctor. Maybe, you can change doctors. There are various things you can do to try to see this illness in a much bigger perspective. And then there are other models. There's a spiritual aspect to integral theory, in which you can see yourself as larger than all of this. You are more than your illness. You are more than you're showing up just in this world as this small person. And if you can get in touch with some of that and with some of the depth and the wisdom and the compassion that we can learn from illness, then you can find yourself in a different place and you can see illness differently. So that's another aspect of integral theory. And then integral theory also has a model of personal growth. So most of us, particularly people who'd be listening to this broadcast, would be really interested in growing themselves. There's a certain stage of development at which we begin to say, who am I? What is this about? Who do I want to be? What's my psychology? How do I understand this world? All those kinds of questions. And we learn to grow and develop. We move from, over the course of our lifetime, if we're lucky, we grow. We move from a really egocentric, self-centered world, not necessarily a nasty one. Not everybody goes through as a horrible person, but they go through as a kind of a self-centered person. Think of yourself as a teenager. Did you really care, how your parents were feeling that day, or were you more interested in getting the car keys? So you start out with that kind of self-centered look, and then you move into a broader look, one in which you begin to care about other people in your community, other people in your nation. But usually, for a while, it's pretty limited. You get connection to some people, but the other people don't seem to be as connected to you. So this group is good, and that group, not so good. So there's a lot of in-group, out-group kind of thing. But there isn't a capacity to work with groups and to live within certain norms and rules and be cooperative and raise a family and get a job and all those kinds of things. And then if you're lucky, you develop beyond that. You start to, first of all, see yourself as an individual, not just, call it groupthink. You start thinking for yourself. So in illness, it's like, okay, well, the doctor says this and my mother says this, but what do I really think? And how do I find out what to do about illness? So then you might start researching. You might actually look around and try to bring in some articles to your doctor and ask about new treatments and seek out people who are experts in the field and that kind of thing. And that's a level of growth. And each of these expands the person. The person has more options every time they grow. And a stage beyond that is to understand the context in which all this is taking place. You can see the effect of society on people and the kinds of illnesses that develop and the effect of the mind on the body and the body on the mind. And so as you can see, this continues. Over our lifetime, we can go more and more and more deeply into these questions. And so we use this growth model and talk about ways that we can grow ourselves and increase our options and increase our understanding of ourselves, get more mature. I mean, maturity helps in illness. If a teenager's sick, there can be really pretty difficult to handle. But an older person who has some realism, some capacity for self-control and things like that, they're going to manage their illness just a lot better. So moving away from these more impulsive places and into more reasoned ones also helps a great deal in illness. So that's just a few of the models, but I find them enormously helpful in just broadening our gaze as we look at illness.
Yeah, this is fine. And mainly you spoke now of the personal development, but you say that's also spiritual development. How do you mean that?
Well, I think if you look at any of the spiritual literature, and I don't regard myself as an expert on this, you can see that the development of wisdom and compassion seem to be paramount. This is a kind of spiritual intelligence. Cindy Wigglesworth has written a book about this. There's kind of spiritual intelligence we can develop, and in many ways we can become a calm and healing presence. We can develop our presence. We can develop our awareness. The witness is the awareness of being, and in the witness, we don't judge. We don't have any sense of is this good or is this bad. We sit and watch, and to the extent that a person can come into this witness state, they have a different view of illness. Ken Wilber uses the term hurts more but bothers you less. So it's not that you cease to feel pain, and it's not that you don't care, but you can see it all from a distant place, from a larger place. And as a result of that, you can develop a great deal of calm and peace in your life. There are other issues of spirituality about letting go, for example. And illness is a great teacher of letting go, because when you can't do something and you keep trying, you can't cure yourself and you keep trying a new thing and a new thing. Eventually, there's a kind of letting go that happens. It doesn't mean you give up. It doesn't mean you stop trying to cure yourself, but you let go inside. That knot of tension can release itself. And there are many other spiritual practices. I mean, meditation is a practice that has been shown to develop people's personal growth as well as spiritual growth. Because meditation teaches you to make object what was subject. And what I mean by that is you can look at a 2-year-old, and when they're angry and screaming, they are anger. When they get to be 7 or 8, they can talk to you and say, oh, I'm angry today. I have anger today. So anger becomes an object. It's something they have a little bit of control over it. And we can do the same thing with a lot of other things. I have a body. I am not my body. So I'm not drowning in this sick body. I'm a person who is larger than this body. I have a body and I have to take care of it. And yes, it's got some problems, but I'm bigger. And then you can go beyond that to go beyond your thoughts. You are not your thoughts. So even though you have these worries and thread and internal rumination, you're more than that. So this constant expansion of being is another aspect of spirituality. So there are many spiritual questions that I think illness just highlights. Again, the issue of why is there suffering, and that comes to the name of my course, which is the koan of illness, because illness presents koans. Koans are unsolvable puzzles, spiritual puzzles. They're given to aspirants in a spiritual tradition to help them expand their minds, not to answer the question, because there is no logical, practical answer to the question. And illness, it's like that. But they're questions that you hold close to yourself. And as you do that, things are revealed to you. You see differently, you see different things. So the question may not be answered in a logical, practical way, but it grows you just to hold that question. So I think that's so much.
Thank you. Martin, would you like to say I muted you because there was a tickle, tickle, tickle noise, but it was not on your side. So if you want to ask something, you must unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There we go. I'm back.
There you are.
I don't think the tickle sound, nothing was tickling me.
It might be the sound of the pneumatic drill here that I can feel.
No, I think it has something to do with your microphone here, that it's sometimes like, well, it's not a problem. Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, I actually want to ask Lynn a question you asked last time, which I found very fascinating and which also hit home with me, about these New Age thoughts of people bringing on illnesses basically to their own thoughts. And
Yeah, negativity, yeah.
I wove that in then with this upper right, upper left question, sharing that I, in 1988, started to have really severe panic attacks, which were because of stress, and I had met who became then my second wife and was in love, but couldn't see her during the week. And there was just a lot of stress in my life. But ultimately, I mean, I realized that my brain had brought on all these physical symptoms. And through meditation and other techniques, I got over them. So on one side, there is, for me at least, a certain truth that sometimes our mind can make us ill. On the other side, somebody asked me why my daughter attracted a benign cancer when she was 9, right? And why she created it with her mind, which really pissed me off. And obviously wasn't that she was thinking about getting cancer. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that's a huge question today, and it shows up in all kinds of areas. It shows up in the battle between conventional and alternative medicine, and the way that people speak about it. And I think it is a quadrant problem. And I think if you can't see the 4 quadrants, you're going to lump everything together. The traditional problem has been in conventional medicine that everything is a physical, and you forget those stupid support groups and don't bother, meditation is useless and all that kind of thing. And that's a quadrant reductionism. That's reducing everything to this one objective behavioral quadrant. So along came the alternative medicine movement and the new thought movement. And we moved to the other side. We moved to the interior, where we said, wait a minute, our thoughts, our beliefs, everything affects our body. And that's true. But they also became guilty of, in my opinion, quadrant reductionism, reducing everything to this quadrant. So I think we have to be very careful not to do that. It seems popular. People seem to love to believe that we create our own reality. But as Ken Wilber says, we don't create our reality. We create our experience of reality. And if we see it in that sense, yes, I can work with my thoughts and my beliefs, and I will see something very differently. My life will be less stressful. I will be happier, and that will affect my body. So whatever it is I have going on, there'll be more energy freed up to fight whatever disease I have. If it's a stress-induced disease, yes, I might actually cure it that way. But if we look at an illness that comes about not clearly through our thoughts and our beliefs, and I know people will argue about this, but I honestly believe that sometimes, I saw a little poster, a tumor is just a tumor. We don't have to turn it into a meaning. We don't have to say you have too much anger at your father. We don't have to say you're not spiritual enough, because those things are actually, to me, a form of cruelty. When people dump that on someone who is ill, it is really an unkind thing to do, because obviously they know all this stuff about thoughts and beliefs, and they're probably beating themselves up inside thinking, I caused this, what can I do? And often it's just not true. Something happened. For us to think we cause everything, to me, is a very deep form of egocentrism. There's an enormous world. There are 7 billion people in this world. Do I control the other person's horrible Ebola who's sitting next to me and gives it to me? Now you could go back and say I wouldn't be in Africa if I didn't blah, 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 and you can trace it back. But basically, no, I got something I didn't ask for. I didn't want. It has affected me. The only question I have now is, how do I relate to this? And that I can use my upper left. I can use my interior. Okay, do I see this as a tragedy? Do I see this as an opportunity? Do I see this as a way to change my lifestyle? Yes, that can all be true. And that can be really helpful. But I think we have to be very careful to look at, where did this problem originate? Because some problems originate in the body. Some problems originate in the mind. The body affects the mind. You find many people who have serious illnesses get depression and anxiety, not because they had depression and anxiety, because the very situation that they find themselves in produces depression and anxiety. Also, the body, the chemicals in the body, can produce all kinds of mental effects. So you'll find people who can have hallucinations from medication, people who can have depression from not getting the right kind of nutrients in the body. You can find all kinds of things like that. And so to lump everything under the heading of beliefs and thoughts, and I'm very, actually really kind of opposed to that. Also, you can get, the culture can lead to illness, the context in which we live. If somebody who lives next to a factory spewing pollution, they're going to be affected culturally. It's not their own thoughts and beliefs. It's not even their own body. It's the exterior. And then the same thing with the systems, the iatrogenic illness. Somebody goes into the hospital and they get injured in some way, or they pick up another kind of illness. My mother died of a MRSA infection she contracted in the hospital. So illness comes from many different directions, and it's solved in many different directions. So sometimes, yes, we have to take medicine. Sometimes, yes, we have to do various treatments. We need to work on our family relationships, and sometimes we need to work on our interior self. The more the better, as far as I'm concerned.
I find that very, very good example how to use integral theory, the 4 quadrants, to get these all things together, because when we look for the reason, it's really just one reason. We, as humans, we want to know exactly one answer to our questions, and we have such a hard time to allow that there might be several reasons, and they may all be true, what Ken Wilber says, true but partial, So
yes, that's such a wonderful phrase. I love that phrase. Yes, true but partial. It's not the whole story. And you're right, everybody wants that silver bullet. They want that answer. If you're sick, by gosh, I mean, the industry makes an enormous amount of money out of sick people who are trying endless treatments to make themselves well. And they're all, well, I'd be desperate too. Anybody's desperate whose life is being upended to try to find an answer. So but looking more broadly is usually more successful.
Yeah, wonderful. That was a good example how useful integral theory can be in everyday life for everybody.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Ever since I discovered it, it's made such a difference in my own life. I mean, it's completely changed the way I see things.
And I think everybody who is ready to understand it has this experience. As far as I know, people from the integral community, everybody said, as soon as I got it, I changed everything,
Yeah, exactly.
And nothing really has come that would go really in that way beyond, at least in my experience. That's also fascinating. How comprehensive the model is. Last time we had
there's no end to learning about it.
Yeah.
Every day I find another way that I can go more deeply.
Yeah. So last time we had also talked a little bit more about the lower right quadrant, about minorities and socially underprivileged people not having access to nutrition and things like that, not because of their own choice, but just of the environment they're living in, right? Which can also lead to more illness and more chronic illness and things like that.
Yes, that's exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah, our systems, our political system, and a political system, for example, can change overnight who gets access to medical treatment. So
Yeah,
that's very important. The economic system, how, who gets paid what, that's another big issue as to how people do it, or where they can live. As you point out, if all you have in your neighborhood is a convenience store, your diet is just not going to be as healthy as somebody who has access to all kinds of organic foods.
Yes.
Yeah. And your social status, that will affect. You go into a doctor and you often hear people say, as soon as I became a patient, my social status dropped. I was reading a book by a physician who said the same thing. Actually, when I was a physician, everybody, sir, and listened to me and everything. And then I became the patient, and I saw how people wanted to pat me on the head and tell me what to do, and or pity, or a lot of things. So yeah, the system affects us a great deal.
Which you
So I have
understand
another
only
question
when
that
you
arose
are
for
on the
me.
other side of the system, when you have changed the position. Before you don't understand it, normally. Excuse me, Martin, you had a lag, so now I give the time to you to talk.
So what about people who have a chronic illness and are, they're aware that they have it, but they start to push other people away and become somewhat cynical about society? Like, all people are crazy. I hate all people, and they're so unconscious, and, not really seeing that they're also, to a large extent, projecting that on society based on their chronic illness, and are not blaming society for their chronic illness, but blaming society in general then for being very insensitive, very unconscious, very,
Well,
just
I
turning
think,
away from life in a way.
yeah, and I think that, I want to first say that there can be very good reasons for that. There are people, illness makes people hypersensitive. You can be like a raw nerve. Everything around you can feel like a disc attack. When you're sick, just think, when I have the flu, it's just like, go away. Don't want to talk about this. And if you've got an illness that leaves you in that state every day, interaction is going to be extremely difficult. The world is going to seem very harsh. So I want to say that just physically, I think we have to allow people to do that, and we have to acknowledge the fact that the world is difficult for them. Another way that we can see this is that I'm forgetting where I was going to go with this, but yes, there is the pushing away of others. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I have an ebook which you can get on my website called the Chronic Wellness Guide or something, and I go through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages and apply them to chronic illness. And so the second stage there is anger. And people get angry. They're angry at their body. They're angry at themselves, but they're angry at everything. And so I think that can be a part of their makeup and a way of being where, yes, you do want to project all that pain out on the society. So it can have a psychological thing. And there, I think it can help to have therapy to deal with that aspect where, you're dealing with this deep anger at everything, and very justifiably. You can see, I would, who wouldn't be angry at being pushed aside and losing their job and maybe having their spouse leave them and not being able to be taken seriously? Yeah, there are a lot of reasons to be angry. But then the resentment can build up, and that can create more health problems. So I think dealing with that is really important. But I think we also have to realize that often people push someone away because they have to push someone away. They just can't actually function in the way that they used to.
But what if we want to help these people, or someone, not these people, but someone who constantly pushes you away and says, I hate you and just leave me alone and the whole world sucks and I'm just going to
I would
go
say,
nuts here and I'm going to die soon because there's, kind of like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my first suggestion would be listen. Just listen to them and let them say whatever they like and don't try to change them. People are always trying to fix. That's another big problem. People are always trying to fix someone who is ill in one way. Either they're going to fix what they eat, or they're going to fix the doctor they see, or they're going to fix how they feel. And I think we just have to stop doing that. I think we have to have respect for people. So listening is one of the best ways to do that. Just listen to someone. You can also, if it's a close relationship and you need to have that relationship, you can ask them. This came up for me even this Christmas after all these years. I was on a call for caregivers and somebody said, we need to ask our loved ones what would make them feel better this Christmas. And I thought, I'm running around trying to make everything better. So I asked my son what would make it better. And he said, a clean house. And I thought, who would have thought? Is that? I was thinking, cut down the noise, change the music, something or other. But I think ask them what would make it better? Well, how could I relate to you in a way? And one of the things we've done in our household is a series of signals. Like if it's getting to be too much, just raise your hand and I'll shut up immediately. And I'll try to accommodate you because almost nobody tries to accommodate sick people. First of all, they don't believe them. Second, they think even if they do believe them, they should be behaving better. So I think, personally, I think we need to listen to them and ask them what they want and say to them, I'm happy to be here on your terms, not on my terms, but on your terms. And I'll have my life on my terms and you can come into it and then it's on my terms. But when I'm with you, I'm going to make it on your terms. So you just tell me what those are. That's my solution.
Yeah.
I want to interfere
Have you also
here.
experienced people feeling shame for their illness?
Oh, I think that's a huge thing. I think the shame and the guilt and all of this, I don't think we realize how much people beat themselves up, how much. I was just reading a book the other day and she said about you lie there in the dark and all of this stuff comes to you, all of the humiliations of your life, all of the shame, all of the guilt. Yes, I think it's a terrible problem. Society adds to that. It makes people feel ashamed of being, of being old. Like, Heidi, you're doing the conscious aging. I think, we're made to feel ashamed of who we are, and illness is one of those things that people tend to feel shame about, unjustifiably.
Yeah. And then do you see it go in the other extreme where people become extremely needy and basically expect that everybody gives them their everything, so to speak?
Yeah, it is a problem. It is a problem. And drawing those lines and finding that balance between caregiver and patient, for example, what can each party expect? And I think being communication. I have one of my courses on relationships, and communication is enormous. You have to talk to each other. You have to figure out what's going on, what each party needs. Each party, counts. The caregiver counts, the sick person counts. Whoever you're talking to, you have to be able to go to your doctor with an understanding of what your doctor needs. Your doctor needs to feel successful. Your doctor needs to be able to limit the time. And people have to respect that when they go in. But the doctor, in turn, has to respect the patient and the patient's maybe inability to speak quickly or to, so there just needs to be a lot of communication, a lot of mutual respect in working on these relationships, because all relationships become more difficult with illness. Whatever difficulties might have been there are still there. People still have all of their personality traits. And now you've got all these extra issues on top.
I want to step in finally and want to acknowledge there is a viewer, Angela Poriski, and she has written some comments. She said he just got here and has a question. He is beyond fatigued, barely can get out of bed. It's been at least 16 years of debilitating exhaustions. Doctors have no idea why. And then she says she's really enjoying this live chat. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I think it sounds a lot like my son's illness, though. I really know what that's like. I mean, years and years and years in bed and unable to do things, and with almost no answers. It's a terrible situation to be in. So I'm really sorry to hear that. I'm glad you did.
Yeah, and Angela, we talked about it before. I don't know if you have heard that Lynn is beginning a course tomorrow. I think tomorrow, isn't it tomorrow? An online course for chronic illness, and you might get some inspiration when you subscribe for it. Would you like to say your website again so that they...
Yes, I think it's on the page below this live stream,
but she seems to be on... She is on YouTube, so she doesn't see it. She would need to go to the wisdomfactory.net/Lynn-Fuentes. Then there is all the other information. But just repeat it. So.
Yeah, well, you can go to transformationteaching.com, which is my website, and there's a section on that called the Koan of Illness. And if you go to the Koan of Illness, there's a listing of the courses, and you can download the ebook, and there's some interviews if people are interested there. So you can sign up for the 4th course, which is the one that's starting tomorrow. And there are deep discounts on there because I don't like trying to, people who are ill don't have a lot of fun. So you'll find deep discounts on there. And if it's not enough, you can write to me and let me know. We'd love to have you. There are a lot of people in this course who are very severely ill, and they've actually been with me for the last 2 or 3 courses, and we've got a wonderful group going. So anybody who'd like to join, please, if you can find your way that route, or you can write to me at lynn@transformationteaching.com. So I hope somebody
Wonderful. Joins. That would be nice if you could give her some inspirational support with that. Thank you, Angela.
I find the other people in the group are really good at that too.
Good. Yeah, we have made almost the hour. So at this point, I would like to wrap up. This is our second conversation, and it turned out to be completely different, and I really loved it. Still, the technology was not perfect, so I still have to learn something. But it was probably better than the first time. So what is the takeaway? I first ask Martin, what is your takeaway from our conversation with Lynn? Both, let's say, both from Wednesday and from today.
My takeaway is I have a few close people who have chronic illnesses, and I don't consider my panic attacks a chronic illness in a way. I mean, I learned so much about how to more compassionately and empathetically interact with them. And I think it also prepared me in a way, I'm 61 now, of getting older and possibly having a chronic illness. And, I was thinking not only people who have a chronic illness should take your course, everybody should take your course. So we're prepared when it hits us, so I'm really so moved and so grateful for your work and what I got out of these conversations. That's my takeaway.
Yeah, and for me, it's the same thing, that to find people who are so dedicated to help others with their knowledge, that's really, really, really great. With their knowledge, not only, but the ability. I mean, you are such a beautiful, I don't know in English the word, but compassionate person. And when I meet you, I never know you, I never have seen you, but here on online, I immediately feel trust. And when you can use your personality, your knowledge, your abilities to help other people to deal with their not good situations, let's say, that's marvelous. I'm grateful also that you came to our show, and in the future we could do another one.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi. It's been really nice talking with you and with Martin, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. So we hope that other people will still get the information and join you in the course. And you were saying you're writing a book about it, so in the future it will be all available also in the book. But I would say a course is better because people in contact with you, it's different than reading a text, you know. So, thank you.
If you're a little late joining, that's fine too. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both. Talk to you again soon.
My technical learning now, now I have lost my page where where I have to switch off the streaming on YouTube. Oh dear, that's so many things to learn. Actually, also for me, I want to do something for other people, and so I have to learn all this technical stuff.
You're doing amazing, Heidi.
Yeah, but you know, now where am I?
Would it be best if I just close out and leave them out?
No, YouTube will continue to do what it does, so it will continue to record. Oh, here I am. I almost got it. So I shouldn't click around on my in my browser. So now I found it. Now I can make stop streaming. Bye bye, audience.
So